What's going on, peoples? This is another episode of Flobo on Netflix. That's a show where we go through the deep archives of Netflix, talk about some of their original series and TV shows and all that jazz. And if you guys have not figured this out already, there are two ways you can get locked into this show. One, available on YouTube and on your favorite podcast device. The audio version talks about all the movies and TV shows that's fit to print. But if you want something more, if you're like, man, I want to know, I've already heard Flobito as a film student, film graduate talk about these films, but I want to know how Flobo the comedian interprets these shows, these stand-up comedy specials. Well, become a member of the Boisterous Crew. That's what we call our Patreon. Patreon.com/Flobo Boys. You get to have unlimited access to the side sister bonus companion show, Flobo Soda on Netflix, where we talk about the comedy specials that are happening on Netflix is a joke. So you get two halves of that. But if you're not into that whole jam, you can always check out the Patreon anyway, patreon.com/Flobo Boys, or you can hang out the YouTube page, youtube.com/Flobo Boys, to see all the visuals of these episodes, or of course the podcast versions are available now. Now today, we're talking about a film that's a little different. You see, if you guys are a fan of this program, you'll know I like to look at foreign films or action films or films that go boom or musicals. This one here is a bit of a character piece, a drama. Passing, written by Rebecca Hall, who is biracial, which is very important for this in just a second, is a film that goes back to 1920s New York City and explores the very nature of colorism. You see, back then, there was an idea of Black people being interpreted one way and white people being interpreted another way. And a cynical person would say that hasn't changed. But the very concept of those who are light enough to pass as white if they're Black, or dark enough to pass if they're Black if they're white, is a whole different thing. We don't see many films about that, even though, especially for us, products of multiracial families or multi-ethnic families, or in my case specifically, being from one origin but having different shades of people within that origin, is something that happens a lot. What does it mean to pass for another race? We'll get into that in just a second. IMDb gives it a 6.6 out of 10. Rotten Tomatoes gives it a certified fresh at 90%. There's a big disparity here. But for me, what intrigued me to this was seeing the autoplay ad that loaded on Netflix when I logged in one fateful day. In fact, I was doing the Don't Look Up episode in preparation, and this one came up, and I go, oh my goodness, this is pretty cool. Like I mentioned before, my family's from single origin. We're West Indian. I'm West Indian American. But my dad's side of the family are a different color palette, if you will, than my mother's side. And seeing some of my relatives being treated differently based on the shade of the skin is something I saw firsthand. We all have a couple relatives that look fairer than others. A lot of my Puerto Rican friends have that issue too. There's like dark Puerto Ricans and there's light Puerto Ricans, and they are considered differently or treated differently in the United States. And so I thought it was kind of interesting for me. That's why I added to queue. Why I decided to watch it is one of its first benefits that it's only an hour and 39 minutes. It's a quick film, especially in the era of 2.5 hour movies. And so people always ask when I do these shows, what I do it for. I recommend this movie in particular for someone that really wants a message and really wants to see a character piece, but it's not going to take them all evening. A lot of these films can become self-indulgent and try to say long before the message just to say, hey, look what I can do. This one here is a breezy clip. Ruth, Negga, and Tessa Thompson star as two friends, and they are perfect for each other. And I like the fact the film's in black and white. You see, it serves two purposes. One, if the film is black and white, you don't have to worry about the suspension of disbelief of Ruth Negga or Tessa Thompson passing for Black or not passing for Black, because under the gray scale, they're very similar in shade. That's a practical reason, but really more of an emotional reason. It really brings to the forefront what it means to be seen as colored in a world that really doesn't exist beyond that. Race is a made up construct. It's something that doesn't really even hold weight in water in different countries. Every country has a different concept of what race is. Some say this color is this people. For example, in the United States, this is a very true example. The word colored is seen as offensive, i.e., you wouldn't call someone who's Black colored. But in South Africa, For example, it is actually a legitimate term to describe someone of mixed origin or race. And so that to me was kind of cool. The fact you see this through a black and white piece, mise en scène, as we used to call it in film school, the high attire aesthetic, the look and feel, the color palette, this case being grayscale, the shot selection from the cinematography, the pacing of all really puts you back to that time. 1920s New York. And another connection there, one of the actors, Andre Holland, is in this piece. I knew Andre, not personally, but I first got familiar with his work from The Nick, which was a turn of the 20th century medical drama that took place in New York. So for me, that guy will always be in period pieces. What I thought was pretty interesting about the idea of that nature. You never really heard about what it means to pass for one race. A lot of times people will say that almost nefariously. Oh, she's passing for white. And that's actually one of the characters here. We see that in Claire. Claire passes as white to really ingrain herself in the community, even though she went to the same school as Rainey, right? But sometimes passing is something that's out of your hands, being assumed to be one color or one race or one background, and you're not. And that is something where it's like the life chooses you. So over time, I thought was pretty cool when you unpeel the layers of Claire's backstory, you really go from, hey, look, she's trying to be white because she sees white as being superior than black. But over time, you go, look, she knows where she comes from and she knows the opportunity she had if she was to be seen black. But look at the world she has now. Maybe she was pulled and drawn out. The white man she's married to is an abject racist who drops the N-bomb in the first or the second scene. I go, oh my goodness me. It's going to be one of those kind of movies. It does have a slow start a little bit. It kind of takes you a while to get into everything, and it kind of makes you wonder what's the point. But the slow burn definitely plays off. It's not going to be a blockbuster. There are no car chases. There are no explosions. But there is points of tension, which I'm sure you'll appreciate for that kind of thing. But I think ultimately what makes this film work is it reaches for something that I think all filmmakers should do if they want to be considered successful across all quadrants. And that is the middle brow. And we talked about this on some of the older episodes. And what does that mean, Flopito? Well, lowbrow humor or lowbrow entertainment is pretty crass. Bathroom humor, those same explosions I was talking about. Michael Bay usually gets dragged in that, seen as being dismissive. A lot of people in the arts don't really like lowbrow stuff. But it's very popular with the people. It's very commercial. On the other hand, you have the highbrow stuff. You have the things that critics rave about. Those who are fans of the art and science of cinema will rave about what's going on, or TV shows will rave about it, but doesn't get the foot to the door. It's very artistic. When you have a studio, you really have to do both. And so that's why you see slates of films having some commercial properties, some art house properties. But when you have a property that hits both at the same time, i.e. a Walking Dead, or which takes a comic book property, but then stretches out to talk about the human condition, or Breaking Bad, which takes a story about drug cooking and distribution, pretty much to a man's story about paying for healthcare as he is ill, or House of Cards, a very unrealistic way of depicting Washington, D.C., but really in a sensational way, we're going to root for a particular politician over another. That's what Netflix goes for. The kind of thing that makes you laugh, cry, angry, and think. The kind of thing that makes you go, hey, look, it's a cool, breezy short film I saw. I was waiting for a meeting. I was waiting for my significant other to get home, but I really, really enjoyed it. Let me tell my friends about it. And this one really does hit the middle brow. It is a very small film. I think it's about 5 characters that are really pronounced here. It's not an ensemble at all. And it kind of takes you back to one of my days in film school where they always tell you smaller is better. But at the same time, the themes being portrayed here about colorism and racism and classism and fidelity of marriage and trusting your significant other are universal themes you all tend to know and enjoy. The writer or the co-writer, Rebecca Hall, I say co-writer because the book which was based off was raised by someone else. Rebecca Hall is biracial herself, so I can probably see that here's a story that she felt compelled to tell. And I think that's kind of cool to be able to have a biracial writer, a screenwriter, teleplay writer really rely on her personal experiences to bring this story to light. Well, one more time before we get out of here, IMDb has it at 6.6. I think it's a little unfair. Rotten Tomatoes has it certified fresh, 90%. I think it's a little unfair. I'm going to give it an 8. I think it's a very, very solid story, a solid premise. Something's very nice. It's tight. It gets in, it gets out. Doesn't try to give you all the answers to every single thing, but it's enough to recommend to your friends when you're over there at brunch and they go, "So, what are you watching?" That is it for me on this edition of Flobo Saw on Netflix. We'll be back soon with more stuff and more content. Thank you so much to people all over the world, to Oman, Qatar, Zambia, the Gambia, for helping this show become a thing, a force of nature. Well, until next time, this has been Flobo Saw on Netflix.